So it goes like this. You go into town hall X, you tell them that it's, effectively over, we're all going to die unless there's a major mobilisation. 30% of people agree to go get arrested, 10 to 20% of people agree to go to prison.
Does it seem reasonable to you that someone would want to try and get other people purposefully arrested for anything that is, say, justifying those type of means? What type of end would justify purposefully trying to get people arrested in a liberal democracy such as the United Kingdom? Well, according to Roger Hallam, a PhD student at King's College London, it's the bloody environment. I will let The Guardian's well-edited video let him explain exactly what he's trying to do.
I'm a researcher and I basically research rebellions. The emailing, writing letters, going on a day march, it's no good. You need about 400 people to go to prison. Maybe you need 2,000 or 3,000 people to get arrested. And I'm at the position where I'm going to go down in November because I'm ready, because we've got nothing else to lose.
Does this seem sensible to anyone? He's talking to a room saying we have to get people arrested because my research shows that the environment is going to be screwed over by human carbon emissions. He's literally asking people to go to prison over this. He's asking for civil disobedience. He's asking to not participate properly in the liberal democracy because his ends is more important than anyone else's. And it's just crazy to me.
Go to prison for a short time. 14 people. All-time record. The action itself is not actually that important. It's the going to prison, which has got cultural resonance, as you might say.
Would it? Does anyone care if these people go to prison? You're not going to prison because you're fighting a good fight. You're going to prison because you're breaking the law. That, by definition, isn't fighting a good fight, because generally, in the West, we have just laws, apart from, of course, the Communications Act, but that's an entirely different thing, because that's objectively infringing rights. But, this whole thing on the environment is something I'm going to have to get into later, but for now, I will just focus on Extinction Rebellion, because they are crazy.
Thank you for what is just the beginning of our Extinction Rebellion.
So here's the deal. We're having a revolution.
Yeah.
And we need people to work full time. What's your background work-wise?
I work for a charity.
Right, so you do project management stuff. It's going to be announced in a minute or two that if people want to sign up, right, to go to Mr. Churchill over there. So I'm still taking you up on your offer to go to prison as well.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely ready to be arrested.
Yeah.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Going around specifically asking, hey, do you want to work full time for me? Oh, you already work for a charity? Planet's dying, come work for me. My rebellion's a good one. Oh, you want to go to prison? Yeah, go to prison. I'm taking you up on that. You have to go to prison. Planet's going to die without it. Just mental. And it's mental because I did a geology course at uni, so I know about the environment. And I know this guy's a PhD researcher, but he's a PhD researcher at King's, who are known for being thoroughly regressive. And the thing with regressive people is they don't believe in the scientific method, so I can't trust his research. Although the uni I went to isn't exactly free from all the regressive agenda that the SJWs have, at least the science and geology department specifically was very much behind the scientific method. And I could tell because I met the researchers, I met the lecturers, and I really did enjoy talking to them, and they really cared about their subject. They didn't care if the planet's warming or cooling, they cared about the truth. And that's everything I could want.
I'm doing something right when I'm pissing off both sides, do you know what I mean?
So, these people are just full of hypocrites, right? Oh, I care about the environment. Oh, we need to get our carbon footprint right down. Oh, but what am I going to do? Going to drive around going to all these towns? Alright, you got to get to places. But they're just totally missing the point of why we actually put carbon into the atmosphere. It's a byproduct of making life a lot better for people. And I mean literally stopping people from starving. Like, how the hell are they powering the electricity to their computers and their lights? They have to do it through the infrastructure we currently have, which unfortunately releases a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. I'm not against trying to cut carbon footprints, But I get the bus to places. I walk to town when I have to. I get public transport all the time and drive as little as possible. I'm doing a lot more than these people are, and I don't even believe in their cause.
That's what
You know,
people always tell you, isn't it?
this is it.
Your
It's the
life
next
will
3
be
weeks
full without
or
this.
nothing.
Yeah.
You know, it just needs to be push, push, push.
I'm a bit stuck into what I'm doing at the moment. It's solid. You see my skin.
I am willing to go to be arrested. I'm willing to be jailed, and I can tell you something. I'm willing to die for this movement because I am not leaving my kids with a future that they're set on right now.
If someone from Extinction Rebellion is watching this, please, I invite you now, just come on a stream with me and we'll discuss the environment. Because you don't really, no one who knows the actual trends of the environment and how the environment actually works would ever stick their hand to a glass building and not let people in because of it. Because really, planet Earth isn't as bad as people say. I mean, sure, you see something on The Guardian every now and then saying, oh my god, 40% of species are have gone extinct. But the way they do that is data manipulation, basically. They only look at their sample areas and they never think that all the animals are migrating. Because animals migrate all the time. Their habitats aren't in one place. I mean, humans were like that for bloody millennia, really, before we started civilizations. We used to be hunter-gatherers. We never stayed in the same place. So they would say that 40% of humans were dying out when actually our populations were rising. So it's just data manipulation. If you want to come and talk to me, Extinction Rebellion. I'm happy to oblige.
They actually want to get arrested because they want to raise the profile of their issue. I mean, does it have dilemma in terms of policing?
Well, no, we will only arrest people if we need to. Just because someone's going to take a course of action that necessitates an arrest, then of course we'll take it.
So at the moment you're happy to stand back and facilitate it. You describe it as facilitate. Let the action happen.
Yeah, well, at the moment the officer in charge decided this is the plan of action we're going to take at the moment. As the situation develops, then the tactics may change. I'm filming this if you want to coordinate that. Yeah, cool. I need as many back as possible. Yeah, give me 2 seconds.
Stunning and brave, going up to a big old building and saying frack off. These people don't understand how fracking works. If you understand how fracking works, I can assure you, you would support it. And I very much support fracking. If you want to see about fracking, please watch my old videos on them. I did them about a year ago. Personally, they are really badly done because they were my first ones, but they give you all the information you need to know. I mean, honestly, fracking is not going to harm the environment, and I know that there are a load of articles coming out saying, oh my god, we got a 1.1 magnitude earthquake. Soon as that happens, they have to stop until they find out what caused that earthquake, and if it's, well, obviously it's related to fracking, but if it's going to make the situation worse and make worse earthquakes, they can't frack anymore. We have safeguards to make sure fracking doesn't destroy the environment, and it's not going to destroy the environment. You have 20 years of them extracting gas from shale, and then after that, they just cover up the old platform with grass again, and you can farm on it. But no one cares. These people don't care. They have a massive anti-human sentiment that we will go into later.
Okay,
that is a weak proof. We've given you your warning. Yeah. I'm just thinking about your safety.
Thanks very much. Appreciate your efforts.
Nails down!
That seems sensible to anyone? Get yourself arrested and just, right, frack off on a building? Yeah, I really think that's going to make people think you're sane and are actually going for a cause that you believe in. Not just that you want to cause a bit of disruption for a bit of fun because you think you're being virtuous. I mean, these people don't understand what they are doing and what they are actually advocating for. They think it's just this one-dimensional, oh, I'm saving the planet thing. It's not. You're saving the planet at the expense of human life and you don't even know it.
With respect, gluing hands on a government building, windows of a government building, what does that really achieve apart from perhaps wasting police time and money?
Gets us on all Russia Today, I suppose. We're looking at mass starvation within 10 years.
But isn't it also about...
No, didn't you hear what I said? We're looking at mass starvation within 10 years. This Saturday, thousands of people will come into central London and sit on the bridges of central London and make a stand.
So what did it achieve? Got you on Russia Today. Okay, so that's basically nothing. No offence, Russia Today. What else did it achieve? Oh, we don't know. Mass starvation in 10 years. There's going to be mass starvation in 10 years, people. No, there isn't. People are coming out of poverty constantly for the past, 3 decades. We have done really well as a society to stop poverty, and you don't even know that. There's more trees in the Northern Hemisphere than there ever have been before because we stopped burning bloody wood. That stops carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, and that is something that you are for, and you don't even know it. You cherry-pick data, and you think there's going to be a mass starvation in 10 years. You are completely wrong. Anyway, at least they can do small, sensible protests.
Tight. Tight.
Join the rebellion, Extinction Rebellion. There's a number of people handing out leaflets advertising the march this weekend on Saturday. So far, no issues.
Good, Extinction Rebellion. Do more of this. This is perfectly legitimate protesting. Gets people toward your cause a bit more because you're doing a bit less than completely inconveniencing people and making people think you're complete nutters. I mean, I still think you are, but I've actually researched this.
Good morning there. Police liaison.
You know, you walk in there, shake hands, and they're super, super pleasant. Just something like, yeah, this will cause gridlock. And she just said it as if it was another day. So maybe you can change the regime, and basically the police will just facilitate it for you. They're going to obey their orders to arrest you, but we're fine with that, right? We can be on the bridge, we've won, or we can be on the bridge and be arrested, we've won.
No, it's a lose-lose situation. If you get arrested on the bridge, you go to jail and you can't do your activism. Sure, people will be like, oh look, they martyred themselves for this cause, but if you don't actually give them the proper statistics or anything to go off, and if you just keep shouting out 10 years we'll have mass starvation, then it's not going to fly and people are just going to think you're idiots, basically. And then if you block the bridge, you're going to get people constantly against you because they need to get to work to do their job to get the money to survive. And if you're blocking them from doing that, they're going to absolutely hate you. It's not going to do any good for your cause, but you're too much of a zealot to understand that. I mean, sure, this is virtue on a planetary scale. You're saving the planet. Oh, in the future, when they're going to say the planet was saved, it's going to be Extinction Rebellion who did it. No, it isn't. The planet isn't doing as bad as you think, okay? I will go through some of the data later, but for now I'm just going to keep laughing at you.
Hundreds of protesters of a movement called Extinction Rebellion are blocking Waterloo Bridge, Blackfriars Bridge, Westminster, Lambeth and Southwark bridges. So 5 bridges.
So it's exactly a mass turnout at the moment, isn't it?
Bloody hell, man. You've got a load of middle-class students coming to help you out. They're not used to getting up before 9 o'clock. Give them a break.
They're supposed to come to this bridge, aren't they?
No, but they don't know where to go. You're supposed to tell them.
Oh, fuck.
Oh my God. Roger, you are the weak link in this.
Oh, right.
You're supposed to be the tactical master.
Well, they don't know they're supposed to be coming to Lambeth.
Oh my God, Roger, I could kill you right now.
Oh my God, that's the funniest thing I've seen in my life. I can't believe it. Oh my God. You think I'm supposed to trust your research when you can't even tell people where they're supposed to be? What are you doing? So it turns out these people are actually so into what they want to do, they actually get up early to try and save the planet. But Roger, being the tactical master and researcher that we all have to listen to, is a complete moron. I mean, to be honest, I know it's one mistake, but it's a pretty big blunder. And as she was saying, she was going to kill herself because he's supposed to be a tactical master. Come on, man, you're supposed to be smart. I mean, that is inexcusable and really funny.
I'm going to be the first one then. Fuck it. Yeah, I think I'll be the first one.
Everyone on! Everyone on, please! Everyone on! To the centre of the bridge!
Let's go!
I mean, I'm not being funny, but given that they've apparently blocked off 2 or 3 other bridges, you'd expect more traffic there, but they're absolutely not blocking anything there at all, because the police have just facilitated around it. And people, I mean, sure, it's going to appear up in the news and everything, but do you think people are going to go, oh my God, the planet's dying when they see it? Or they're going to go, oh look, there are the twats that stopped me from getting to work on time this morning? Because I know which one they're going to do, and they're going to be very happy if you do end up getting arrested.
We do need at least one good bridge open straight to A&E, straight to that very, very important hospital.
You know, if you have an ambulance down there and you say, look, if you want to get it through, that's no problem. It's just come through.
You need to leave now, otherwise you will be arrested. Do you understand? You want to protest, Westminster is currently closed. You can protest there.
So they're not even supposed to be on this bridge. And they said they're going to let emergency vehicles through, which, okay, you got a great blockade there, well done. But think about it this way. Because 3 or 4 bridges have been completely blocked off because of these people, that makes a lot more congestion and traffic in London. That stops emergency vehicles getting to where they need to be as quickly because of all the traffic in London that you have now caused. And if someone died because of this, I would be very much against you. I'd be very much against your tactics, and I would certainly, out of just general spite and vengeance, want the planet to die because you want to save it. If I was to be that spiteful.
Oh, great. Got some arrests as well.
Out of the way! Out of the way!
Here's the only thing that ever hurts. Never doubt that it's small.
We're getting there.
I cannot understand why people would be happy about people being arrested for just laws. I mean, personally, I'm trying to look at this from my point of view, but say the Communications Act of 2003, Count Dankula got arrested for that, and I want to see more people arrested for that, who are obviously willing, who under their own consent want to be arrested for that. I personally don't, because I'm a wuss, but, you know, if people are constantly being arrested by that, and it gives me more to protest about, so I can go, look at all these people being arrested by an unjust law. But the problem with this type of thing is that they don't have a leg to stand on. These are perfectly just laws. You can't just block roads for whatever reason willy-nilly that you think. You can't just block roads because you think it's bad for the environment. I can't get my head around about why anyone would think this was good. If someone actually thinks what they're doing is good, please tell me why in the comments, because I just can't get my head around it.
I need you to clap your hands for me, please.
You have given me such treasure, I love you so.
You're not achieving anything here. You're just thinking it's Woodstock and thinking that, you know, kneeling there praying for Mother Earth is going to save it. No, politicians aren't going to listen to this. They're just going to think you're idiots, unless they're on the Labour side, of course. But we need better politicians. We need a better police force because, like, as you're about to find out, Roger isn't a very happy man.
There's been a complaint that the arrests aren't happening quick enough. So, unfortunately, we need to find a number.
There was too many of you. And we may have run out of police officers at the minute until we get some more police officers.
It's just not acceptable. 1963, Birmingham, Martin Luther King campaign, the police requisitioned buses from the bus company to arrest them.
More buses.
And then we don't really want to block the roads, we just want to get a load of people arrested. And then we can say to the politicians, 1,000 people are happy to lose their liberty because we want some change.
God, I can't even get my head around how weird that situation must be. You're being told by an actual radical how to police more brutally, let's say. Not brutally. Just use these tactics by racist cops in 1963. That'll go through well. Like, you know, Martin Luther King, like, this happened to him, but he was a civil rights activist who was doing something like good for his community on an individual level. What you're doing is trying to save the entire planet because you've cherry-picked research, as I said. But it's his line. We don't really want to block roads, we just want to get arrested. If you're blocking the road, you would actually cut down on CO2 somewhat, because less people would probably use cars that day. But there's also a chance that it could increase because of the more congestion and the more stopping and starting of traffic. So you obviously don't actually care about CO2 here, you just care about making a statement and being a LARPing revolutionary. Because that's all you are. You're trying to LARP into a point of getting the government to absolutely kick in the teeth of anything that produces CO2. And that's wrong, because CO2 producing objects, let's say, cause people not to be starved, but you think that mass starvation is going to happen anyway. You're not making any sense.
They've got a bus. A bus, did you say?
Transportation.
To get everyone off the road. So they're going to speed up a little bit now.
As you requested.
Fantastic stuff.
I think I've worked out my exact problem with this. He's compared himself to Martin Luther King. He thinks what he's doing is literally getting people's human rights in order and getting them all so that they are perfectly free. I mean, they're already free, and he's saying, oh, we're going to lose the freedoms we have in the cause for this. But the thing is that what Martin Luther King and all those did was they did an example of what they thought a just society should look like. So, for example, they sat in the white areas on buses and started mass legal demonstrations that the police ended up just beating people in because they were racist, and they were breaking laws that were racist, such as Jim Crow laws. So what they were doing was actually breaking unjust laws, as we would say now, in an attempt to get civil rights in order for everyone. But what you're doing is breaking a completely different law that is never going to change, that makes actual just sense. And you're doing that and saying, oh, look at this, like we're getting arrested and it's because the planet's unjust. It's non sequitur. It really is non sequitur. The best thing you can do is try and find a way to make your carbon footprint as reduced as possible, and then find a way to get every human to do that. And a good way to do that, maybe, is to invent a source of energy that's actually economically viable and maybe takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere somehow. I'm not the type to do that, but all you are is an environmental researcher at King's who has decided one day that this research shows that I have to be civilly disobedient because I believe the planet's going to die without it. And it's just ludicrous. I can actually believe how many people you've talked into this, because people will believe anything they hear on The Guardian.
At this time, we're stopping any more arrests because we've got 2 of the bridges open, so therefore we deem that the threat to life is no longer as high as it was, because St Thomas's can move freely from Waterloo Bridge and Blackfriars Bridge.
Right.
All right, and that's the message, obviously, from the bonds.
Okay, so that's just put in plain English. Because the other 2 bridges, the large bridges, decided to move to Parliament Square to carry on the protest, which wasn't part of the plan, according to Roger, then no one else is being arrested. Now, this hasn't made Roger very happy, but listen to his language here. It is insane.
Because our comrades on the other bridges have not maintained revolutionary discipline and held their bridges, they've decided this bridge is no longer going to be a threat to life, in inverted commas, whatever that's supposed to mean. So they're not going to continue arresting people.
This points out another 2 problems I have with him. He sounds like a Marxist revolutionary in the Bolsheviks. He just sounds insane because my comrades haven't maintained revolutionary discipline. I mean, if he had more control over the government, he'd probably punish those people for exercising their freedom to move where they want the protest to move, because they could go to Parliament Square. But he'd probably have them in gulags. I don't think he'd actually have them in gulags, but he would certainly try and punish them. And I imagine the people who were leading those 2 charges are probably not going to be leading any more anytime soon, at least not without a bollocking. But he also, listen again to how he says this.
They've decided this bridge is no longer going to be a threat to life, in inverted commas, whatever that's supposed to mean.
You are blocking access to a hospital for ambulances with people who may have just been stabbed in London. And even if you are saying, as you say, oh, well, let the emergency vehicles through, there's more traffic in London because you've blocked 5 of the bridges. People are going to die with this. I'd be surprised if people weren't late to doctor's appointments, or if they weren't late to A&E because of your selfish fucking act, you cretin. Jesus Christ, man. You do not give a shit about human life. You think the planet is more important than the people on it. Well, I don't. I fucking like my environment to be as natural as possible, don't get me wrong, but this is why we have natural national parks, to keep the environment the way it is. We have more trees in the northern hemisphere. We are doing our best to find a sensible route to stop more carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. And again, I will go through this later. But for God's sake, man, give a shit about human life. Jesus!
Next week we do 10 bridges. We're looking at 500 plus arrests, aren't we? Which will be the biggest number of arrests for political protest in a decade or two.
I totally reject the way you've just phrased that. It is not the most arrests for a political demonstration. It is the most arrests at a political demonstration, because it's totally illegitimate. The reason you tell the police about blocking bridges is so that they can find a route for their emergency vehicles to go round that protest. But you ignored that and blocked it anyway, which is breaking the law. A just law, for as I have just had a go at you for the throwaway line, oh, whatever risk to human life means anyway. But if you're protesting illegitimately, which in our society we generally have a good system for protesting, then no, you are not being arrested for politically protesting. You are being arrested for breaking the law at a political protest. So don't try and play this off as if you're victims, because you're purposely trying to get yourself arrested. You're purposely finding ways to get yourself arrested, and it's just wrong. It's a waste of people's time and of the taxpayers' money. So please stop. You can find better things to do with your time than trying to have virtue on a planetary scale. Well, that's the end of the Guardian's mini-doc on him, really, but honestly, I still don't really understand what their political goals are, apart from to get arrested and we want change. Well, and that's really not a good place to stand on a political protest. For example, the Liberalists have some very, very defined aims that we aim to get. For example, we want the Communications Act of 2003 to revoke Section 127, where you can be arrested for a grossly offensive joke on the internet. That's just one example of many, because we also want a Brexit implemented because it was the result of the referendum in 2016. So I went out of my way and found their demands for you. And lucky for you, they only have 3. So, fight for life. We are facing an unprecedented global emergency. The government has failed to protect us. To survive, it's going to take everything we've got. So our demands. The government must tell the truth about the climate and wider ecological emergency, reverse inconsistent policies, and work alongside the media to communicate with citizens. I am actually behind this because most things, such as the Paris Agreement, are in no way actually going to help the climate change, and the Climate Change Act of 2008 is beyond ridiculous in the UK. 2. The government must enact legally binding policy measures to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2025 and reduce consumption levels. Okay, no, that is actually going to cause mass starvation in less than 10 years, you absolute insane retards. And number 3, a National Citizens' Assembly to oversee the changes as part of creating a democracy fit for purpose. I mean, the UK's democracy isn't perfect, but it's fit for purpose, for God's sake. Citizens' Assembly, for the will of the people, eh? I mean, for God's sake, you can actually legitimately say that with the referendum in 2016, but for God's sake, like, I assume this is going to be a Citizens' Assembly where the people aren't actually voted in. Unless you do plan to vote them in, and if that's the case, I'm definitely voting for the most climate skeptic person on there, because you are going to cause so many people to die if you actually get what you want. I can't even begin to explain. Well, I think that adequately covers Extinction Rebellion and their absolute inane retardation. So what I'm going to do now is from what I could gather from that, they are mainly against carbon dioxide emissions, because their 3 demands are literally just about carbon dioxide. So I'm now actually going to give you a small lesson in what carbon dioxide exactly does. I do also want to point out that there is an observable high rate of extinction of animals from when humans came about. But humans came about, we think, about 3 million years ago, and they started to properly civilise and actually cause a massive change in the ecosystem about 20,000 years ago, maybe a bit more. That's when they all started migrating, becoming intelligent, and getting better at basically out hunting other animals and hunting them into extinction. It's why when we went to Australia we barely have any marsupials today, because they all went extinct from when humans went over, and not even directly hunting them into extinction, although that did happen in some cases with the dodo, but with marsupials, it was more that the Aboriginals there were just better at catching the same prey as them, so because they couldn't compete, they died out. So basically there is probably a mass extinction going on right now. How much of it is actually down to climate change? Well, that is actually debatable. So let's get into the short discussion on carbon dioxide. So the government climate scientists say that if the CO2 level doubles, as it will do by about between 2070 and 2100, the climate models estimate that the temperature increase due to that extra doubling of the carbon dioxide emissions will be about 1.1 degree multiplied by 3, which is about 3.3 degrees. So it will be about 3.3 degrees warmer by about the end of the century. The climate scientists also say feedbacks are due to the ways that the Earth reacts to the direct warming of carbon dioxide. The threefold amplification by feedbacks is based on the assumption, or guess, let's say, made around 1980, that more warming due to the extra carbon dioxide will cause more evaporation from oceans, hence more water vapour, which will turn into more heat trapping due to water vapour being a greenhouse gas. And the extra heat will cause even more evaporation and so on. This amplification is built on all the climate models. The amount of amplification estimated by assuming that nearly all industrial age warming is due to our CO2. And the thing that the media do is put these projections up and say, oh, this is entirely from CO2. It's not. It's from CO2 plus the feedback effect. But that's not the whole story of the feedback effects, as the skeptics say. While the skeptics also agree that carbon dioxide does increase global temperatures by about 1.1 degrees, they think the feedback actually dampens it by about half. The feedbacks dampen or reduce the direct effect of carbon dioxide, cutting it roughly in half. The main feedback involves evaporation, water vapour and clouds. In particular, water vapour condenses into clouds, so extra water vapour due to the direct warming effect of extra carbon dioxide will cause extra clouds, which then reflect sunlight back out into space, cooling the Earth and reducing the overall warming. There are literally thousands of feedbacks, each of which either reinforces or opposes the direct warming effect of the extra carbon dioxide. Almost every long-lived system is governed by net feedback that dampens its response to a perturbation. If a system instead reacts to the perturbation by amplifying it, the system is likely to reach a tipping point and becomes unstable, like the electronic squeal that erupts when a microphone gets too close to its speaker. The Earth's climate is long-lived and stable. It has never gone into runaway greenhouse, unlike Venus, which strongly suggests that the feedback dampen temperatures, perturbations, as that from extra carbon dioxide. And I have to agree, just from an initial point of view, that makes sense. Because we used to have an Earth almost covered in snow. The equator didn't quite have the ice. We call it snowball Earth. And that should have technically caused the Earth to stay as a full ice ball for millennia, but it didn't. It didn't actually last too long. And that's because the feedbacks don't really amplify it usually in Earth's history. It's always dampened it as to basically make life live constantly for about 600 million years, probably more. So that's my initial guess at what's actually happening. Of course, these skeptics aren't just giving their opinion, they actually give data. The climate models have been essentially the same for 30 years now, maintaining roughly the same sensitivity to extra carbon dioxide, even while they got more detailed and more computer power. So how well have the climate models predicted the temperature, and does the data better support the climate models or the skeptics' view? So first they look at air temperatures. One of the earliest and most important predictions was presented to the US Congress in 1988 by Dr. James Hansen, the father of global warming. And he gives us a nice little graph here showing that the climate models in all three scenarios have overshot it by quite some margin. Hansen's climate model clearly exaggerated the future temperature rises. Yes, we can see that. In particular, his climate model predicted that if human CO2 emissions were cut back drastically starting in the 1988, such that by the year 2000 the carbon dioxide level was not rising at all, we would get scenario C. But in reality, the temperature did not even rise this much, even though our carbon dioxide emissions strongly increased, which suggests that the climate models greatly overestimated the effect of carbon dioxide. They then move on to yet another air temperature prediction. A more considered prediction by the climate models was made in 1990 in the IPCC's first assessment report. It's been 20 years now, and the average rate of increase in reality is below the lowest trend in the range predicted by the IPCC. So basically, their lowest estimate is pretty much the course we're on, and we're probably even below that. And this is all data that's easily sourced. In fact, they source it all themselves at the end of this, so if you want to have a look at it yourself, just click the description. But I mean, it's ridiculous. Their high estimate is so high that they thought in, 2 decades they'd go up a whole degree. I mean, the Earth's temperature just doesn't change that fast unless something catastrophic happens, and we're clearly not doing anything catastrophic given that the air temperatures are, well, their general trend is up by not very much, so I wouldn't have too much to worry about personally. So next, the skeptics go into the ocean temperatures. And the ocean holds the vast bulk of the heat in the climate system, and we've only been properly recording the temperatures since 2003 with the Argo system, which is basically a buoy that sinks down a temperature probe to about 2,000 meters and then slowly raises it up to measure the temperatures, and then it sends the results to the scientists. And as we can see from this graph, it's basically been flat since we started in 2003, and then the climate model said we'd be up by 6.0 joules in about 9 years in terms of changes in the ocean heat content, which is basically the temperature. So, you know, what the hell? Like, there's no need to worry about, well, not no need to worry about it. Obviously, worry about the carbon dioxide you add into the atmosphere, because we can't just put loads of it in, because that has caused, like, really large changes in the climate in geological history. But, I mean, honestly, it's not as bad as they make out. They go through quite a few other points, but I'm just going to skip it because you get the idea now. But I will end with their last paragraph. Notice that the skeptics agree with the government climate scientists about the direct effect of carbon dioxide. They just disagree about the feedbacks. The climate debate is all about the feedbacks. Everything else is merely a sideshow. Yet hardly anyone knows that. The government climate scientists and the mainstream media have framed the debate in terms of direct effect of CO2, and sideshows such as Arctic ice, bad weather, or psychology. They almost never mention the feedbacks. Well, why is that? Who has the power to make that happen? Well, it's an interesting question, and there are a lot of pro-climate change Act lobbyists throughout the House of Lords and the House of Parliament. Just, they really do want to push against any type of, you know, oil industry, any type of fracking. They are adamantly against it with outright, I wouldn't say lies, it's more just misleading statistics and misleading data, because if the way those models are worked out is just by direct effect of CO2 with only the amplifying feedbacks without any of the dampening ones, and that's why they end up with those models, and they all end up completely wrong. I mean, we are overestimating how bad global warming is actually going to be, even if trends keep going the way they're going. Because we keep adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, and to have the ocean temperatures pretty much not change over the last 10 years, I mean, that's quite impressive, really. But these things take time. I'm not saying don't do anything again, just it won't be as bad if we get worst case scenario. And, well, if you don't think one website with publicly available information is enough to convince you, then I instead have this interview from Good Morning Scotland, who have Bjorn Lomberg on as the climate skeptic debater, and he is incredibly good.
Scientists are calling it the final call, the most extensive warning yet on the risks of rising global temperatures. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report earlier this week predicted global temperatures are set to rise to 3 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The IPCC says urgent and drastic action is imperative to keep the rise at 1.5 degrees or less. The consequences of this are hard to imagine, but rising sea levels and more frequent extreme weather events would seem to be on the cards. Many environmentalists are now demanding that governments adopt more radical measures to deal with global warming, although politicians have been slow to act so far. So how should we approach the future regarding climate change? Joining
This is what I find annoying. Just listen to how that was all framed. It's all like, oh, so this... We've made more predictions that it's going to be even worse than our last predictions, but everyone knows that global temperatures aren't rising as fast as people say. We just predict they are, which is a totally different thing. The second assertion is, of course, that the governments are just too slow to react to these things. But, like, who decides that? How do we know they're not going that quick? I mean, again, we're just relying on these predictions by people who basically want to see climate change happen just so that they can get their way. At least that's what it looks like.
Well, George Monbiot, there was a lot of media attention for this IPCC report. What is noticeable by its absence is much urgency by government saying they've got to do anything about it.
Well, yes, there's not a single government anywhere on earth at the moment whose actions are in line with their commitments under the Paris Agreement. And in fact, what we've seen is a rash of new coal mines and new fracking permissions being given, even in the wake of this IPCC report. Now, if there's one thing we know we have to do, if we're going to have any chance of preventing more than 1.5 degrees of global warming and preventing the disasters that will ensue from more than 1.5 degrees, it is leaving fossil fuels in the ground. The thing about climate breakdown is that you prevent it by stopping doing the bad things more than by doing the good things. You've got to get out of certain activities, and fossil fuels is the number one activity you've got to get out of.
Yes, but unfortunately, people rely on fossil fuels so they don't starve. This is the thing. It's just like, oh, why can't we just stop fossil fuels? Because people will literally starve to death. People rely on it to warm their homes, to cook their food. They rely on it. And I agree, we probably shouldn't rely on it as much as we do now. But you don't just change an infrastructure based on fossil fuels in a year. It takes literally decades. We're going to have to decommission them, dismantle them, replace them with more reliable things. But that's the thing, nothing's actually reliable. And if anyone tells you that environmentally friendly renewable energies are in any way economically viable, then they are a liar. I mean, in Denmark, I think 42% of their energy comes from wind farms. It's only 42%, and they have so many wind farms, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I hate the look of them, and I know some people don't like them, but it's not totally saved their country.
Now, Bjorn Lomborg, your attitude is that climate change is happening, it's man-made, but you think there's no need to panic in quite the way that you think, say, the IPCC scientists are panicking.
Well, I think it's important to get the science right. First of all, George is absolutely right that there's no government that are anywhere close to the promise of 1.5 degrees. Let's just remember the IPCC was asked by governments to find out what would it take to actually live up to what we promised back in Paris in 2015 to the perhaps 1.5 degrees. And basically, if you're just going to summarize this rather lengthy report in a very short sentence, it is almost can't be done. And so what this really tells you is if you want to try to aim for 1.5 degrees, you've got to do everything and the kitchen sink, and it's going to be incredibly hard and incredibly expensive. And I think that's probably why we need to look at something else that happened the same week, namely the Nobel Prize was awarded to a climate economist, Nordhaus, who's been looking a very long time on saying, well, what should we actually be doing? Because, of course, remember, climate change is a problem, but so is cutting carbon emissions. Cutting carbon emissions have cost. Doing nothing also have cost. We got to weigh those two against each other. And what he tells us is you should do something. So you should do more than what we're doing today, but you should not be aiming for 1.5 degrees because it's just utterly wasteful.
Anyone disagree with that? No? Good. Carry on.
What's your response to that, George? Because the measures that are being suggested to implement, even this keeping the rise in post-industrial temperatures to 1.5 degrees or below, are drastic. I mean, you wrote in a column this week about how we pretty much need to end economic growth. We'd certainly need to end, fossil fuel power stations, probably stop driving cars that are powered by diesel or petrol. It's not going to happen by 2030.
Well, one of the reasons why we're in this fix now is that for decades we've been listening to siren voices like Bjorn's and like William Nordhaus telling us, oh, don't worry, it's not such a big deal, we don't have to act so fast, the costs of action are too great. And the longer you leave it, the greater those costs become and the harder it becomes to avert breakdown and avert disasters. And this is what we're now facing. And it's very easy for people in the rich world to say, oh, it's all a bit excessive taking action. Because
George, I know you live in London, and I know it's pretty easy for you to just think that it's all the elite and the rich people saying this, But the poor people are saying the same thing. The poor people rely on this crap. They rely on CO2 being pumped into the air so that they don't starve. They rely on it to get to their jobs. They rely on it to have jobs. Like, you can't just say, oh, it's the rich people that aren't letting us do this. No. The poor people would literally have no idea how to survive without it. And you can't just change that because you want to be a virtuous little boy.
Because we're not going to be the people who get hit first and get hit worst. And already around the world, there are populations being hit very hard by climate breakdown, and it's only going to get worse for them. Now, yes,
but
we do
hang on, George.
radical...
You say the rich world there, but it's precisely in emerging economies where your idea of stopping economic growth is going to seem least attractive in places like China and India and Indonesia and a whole swathe of other countries where you say, well, look, obviously climate change is a problem, but we're not giving up our chance to catch up with the more advanced countries in order to stop it.
That's a very good point. I mean, imagine saying to the third world, right, we've built our economies through fossil fuels and by making infrastructure like the best thing ever. You can't do that, though, because we killed the planet, and we can't have you doing that. Even though third world countries are doing quite well with renewable resources, but when they get oil, oh my god, that makes them boom, and I do mean boom. And it's why China have just made a load of coal power stations. And as it's been pointed out, about when people are earning about... When a country's GDP per capita is about $5,000, then the country starts bringing in climate-type policies, which make their air cleaner, reduce the amount of emissions they send out, because they have to get rich in the first place to actually solve these problems. And, of course, George probably doesn't care about that, but let's see what he says.
We've all made a grand mistake here in assuming that GDP is a measure of well-being. It is not. Even Simon Kuznets, who formulated the concept of GDP, said it should not be used as a measure of well-being. If we want to measure well-being, it is well-being that we should measure. Now, going hell for leather with more coal and more fossil fuels and, incidentally, of course, all the pollution and destruction they cause locally will massively impoverish people and cause enormous dislocation, enormous displacement and death. It is a suicidal course to be taking for any nation, but particularly for the nations which are most vulnerable to climate change. So our responsibility as rich nations is to help them take a different route, to meet the needs of their people, to ensure well-being and prosperity by low-carbon methods.
Okay.
Is it just me, or did that sound exactly like the white man's burden? Oh, we have to civilise all these places. It's our responsibility to civilise them, but don't let them have the same infrastructure as us. Oh, no. He literally just pointed out every worst-case scenario, but as the data I went through before shows, we're nowhere near worst-case scenario. I mean, honestly, I'd be surprised if any country had to fully evacuate because it got too hot, even in Africa. Like, Africa probably are going to be most affected by global warming as well, but in 50 years, it's probably only going to go up by a degree. At least that's what actual data shows, and if we actually keep on putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, maybe it will go up by a degree in about 100 years, but who knows?
Okay, well, Bjorn, your point of view is the opposite, isn't it? It's that the economic consequences of what the IPCC argues are not really all that great, and they're particularly not all that great when put into the context of what the economic growth that George is against could deliver by, say, the end of this century.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I think your point on how most of the world's poor people are looking at this are very, very different. They very clearly want to be able to say, my kids are not going to die from easily curable infectious diseases. They're actually going to have food. They're going to have jobs. They're going to have opportunities that we take for granted very, very clearly. And George is absolutely right in saying GDP is by no means perfect, but it just turns out to be that GDP is actually a very good indicator for human satisfaction, human well-being. And we know this because when you compare it to many of the other indices that George and many others would argue that we should be looking at, GDP outperforms almost all of them. Now, I'm not going to make this into a defense of GDP, but the fundamental point here is to recognize that if you stop economic growth, if you tell people you can't have easy access to abundant energy, we know that that means you're not going to get out of poverty. And actually, the UN Climate Panel uses that exact point. They talk about that we can see many more people in poverty if we don't do something about global warming. But let me just finish that sentence. But the background report actually tells us very clearly what really important to avoid people in poverty is obviously economic growth.
If I did anywhere near that amount of research, that's exactly how I'd respond to George. But Bjorn has been doing this work for decades now, so he's just so much better than me. But that is pretty much coherent with everything I've gone through today and everything I've learned about carbon dioxide. It's crazy.
Now, how would you reply to a criticism of your views, which are basically that some of the massive resources that would be needed to do what the IPCC wants would be better invested in other areas, like, for example, eradicating diseases like malaria? Now, I suppose one criticism of what you're saying would be that there's no sign that that's happening any more than governments getting together to eliminate or to stop climate change. There are obviously attempts to eradicate various diseases and to do the kind of mitigation of global warming things that you want. But there's no sign of a massive intergovernmental program on the scale that the IPCC wants to mitigate climate change.
Oh, I think both George and I would agree that there's a vast number of things that the world's government should be focusing more on. But just remember two things: the dramatic advance in economic prosperity, especially in China, India, and elsewhere, has basically lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty over the last 30 years. That's a tremendous achievement that we cannot be proud enough of. That has dramatically reduced human suffering in so many different ways. The other thing where we're talking about tuberculosis, malaria, all the other things that are very easy to deal with and that many people in the developing world want us to focus on much more. Remember, we spend about $140 billion on global development aid. Right now, the OECD estimate that about a quarter of that money is being spent on climate help, which is very clearly what the developing world is telling us they don't want. So yes, there is actually a real sense in which we could take a quarter of that and help to deal with tuberculosis, malaria. We could actually eradicate the world's biggest infectious disease killer for less than that.
Yet another outstanding point. Can you imagine being in poverty, having all these diseases that you can't deal with, and then you go to the first world and ask for help, and all they say back is, oh, you know, just quieten down there. We've got this climate change thing to sort out. You know, you could be displaced. I mean, they're not going to give a shit about being displaced. Their kids are dying of tuberculosis and malaria. Like, come on, just think about it. These people don't care about the environment until they're rich enough to care about the environment. So the best thing to do is to get them as rich as possible, as quick as possible. And then all of a sudden you'll find out that maybe most of the world will want renewable energy. Hopefully we'll have enough resources to do that, but it doesn't seem we do at the moment. I mean, no one has a good alternative.
George, what's your answer to this basic point? It's a point that comes up in debates about inequality as well. People say, oh, it's terrible, there's more inequality in America or Britain. And the reply is, well, yeah, okay, maybe, but there's been a massive reduction in inequality in the world scale over the last few decades because of things like the rise of China. And the same point is Bjorn Lomborg's point about climate change, that of course you're right, that people in poorer countries will suffer the effects of climate change perhaps more, but that's overwhelmingly outweighed overwhelmingly by the benefits that economic growth brings.
Well, you see, it's paradoxical, isn't it? Because there's no question that fossil fuels and growth has caused a great reduction in deprivation. But it's now very clear, as the report shows, that they will cause a great increase in deprivation. You get past a tipping point, which the report identifies as 1.5 degrees centigrade of global warming, and things start to get very hairy indeed for many of the world's populations. And the truth remains that the biggest emitters are people like ourselves in the rich world. So this is something that we're imposing on other people. And Bjorn has very cleverly, as he always does, diverted this into, well, you're trying to take something away from India and China. Actually, what I'm trying to do right now is to say that we, in the rich nations, have to stop using fossil fuels, have to decarbonise our economies and make this our number one priority. Now, at the same time, of course, we should be spending more on relieving global disease. And we should be taxing our own rich people more so that we can do that. And of course, at the same time, we should be helping poorer nations also undergo the transition out of fossil fuels and into clean energy. And there's no reason at all why people's needs cannot be met by clean energy. In fact, when you look at the air pollution crisis in India at the moment caused by dirty energy, you'll see it's massively contributing to the burden of disease there.
Okay.
This discussion hasn't really been about as much as global warming as I thought it would be, but to be honest, it brings up a few other good points that I want to point out. Firstly, when you hear George there, he's saying, oh, tax the rich, like, oh, it's the rich country. It's like, as George Orwell said, the socialists don't want to help the poor because they like them. They want to think they're helping the poor because they hate the rich. And it's the exact same here. They can just blame rich oil companies for all this. And he says there's no reason why we can't use renewable energies instead of coal ones or whatever. And it's like, yeah, there absolutely is. If there was no reason, no one would do it. Do you really think that oil companies have so much power that they can literally dictate to a country how their infrastructure should be? No, they're just copying ours because it's a good system. It's given us so much that we take for granted. And you're saying that well, no, apparently you're not saying that. You're saying, oh, the rich countries have to punish themselves for this. It's like, oh, there's no real reason.
Okay, Luke, let's end just by looking at what you pair of you think will happen rather than what you think should happen. Just very, very, almost yes or no answer, George. Do you think governments will take action commensurate with the demands in this report?
Not without mass mobilisation by their people, which is what I'm trying to foment.
Bjorn, what do you think?
No, absolutely not. We're not anywhere close to getting to this point. And also, fortunately, that's what the economic evidence tells us. We should be doing something, but not nearly as much. But we do need to do more. So in that case, I think George and I agree, we should be cutting CO2 more than what we're doing today.
That wasn't yes or no, but we'll let you
I'm
with
sorry.
That. Bjorn Lomborg, George Monbiot, thank you both very much.
Yep, I'm totally with him on that. We should be doing something. And so to end this video, I'm going to give my personal suggestion, and that is carbon capture storage. What this is you basically take carbon dioxide from however you can, say if you're at a power station, instead of having a chimney, you have something to store all the carbon dioxide and other nasty little bastard little gases in. You store that, send it over to an old oil rig or something, and you pump it back underground to where oil used to be. And doing that will really, really reduce a country's carbon footprint. I mean, for God's sake, in Britain alone, we have the total capacity potential of up to 22 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide. Because there's so much oil that we've brought up from underwater and within shales in East and West England. Just it'd be so easy. And also, you can use it to get more oil out of underground. If you set up it so that an oil rig at one side was taking up all the oil, and then at the other side you had another one putting carbon dioxide into the ground, that would push the oil along and more efficiently get more oil out. So that would make it cheaper for oil companies, and you're reducing their overall carbon footprint. I mean, it's just a no-brainer to me. I don't understand why we don't do it. Well, I do, because it's incredibly expensive, and you'd have to redo an oil rig, basically, so that it pumps down gas instead of pump up oil. So I understand that, and it could take a while, but this is what I mean. These people aren't serious about actually saving the planet. They just hate capitalism, and it's obvious, because look at the disregard for human life that Roger had. He was just like, oh, well, we're a risk to human life. Oh, what does that mean? It's like, oh, come on, you're better than that. They just hate capitalism, and they hate the fact that there are so many people doing better than them. That's all it seems like to me. But, well, that's everything I had for today. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.